Q Review Print Speaking to the Blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the Herald Scotland podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @CuneReview, that is @symbol CUEANDREVIEW. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@cunereview.com. That is INFORMATION @CUEANDREVIEW.com, or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
The Herald Scotland on Wednesday the 5th of February 2025. From the news section. Fringe Society receives keys for permanent home in Edinburgh. This article has been written by Jodie Harrison and it's being read by me, Corey. The Edinburgh Festival Fringe Society will today receive the keys to a new home. The former Southbridge Community Resource Centre on the city's Infirmary Street is set to become a permanent home for the Fringe and the Society. The premises will secure the long-term sustainability of the Society and its services and operations, as well as provide the opportunity for a publicly accessible space for artists. The move was made possible through £7 million capital funding from the UK Government and additional funds through grants from the Foyle Foundation and the SP Energy Networks Transmission Zero Net Fund. Shona McCarthy, Chief Executive of the Edinburgh Fringe Society, said, "This is an exciting moment which has taken nearly 2 years of planning and discussion to get to this point. The conversation of Southbridge Resource Centre into a year-round Fringe home will allow local cultural and community organisations and Fringe artists the opportunity to utilise this space as well as being a new space for the Fringe Society team. It will allow a permanent home for our August community hub, known as Fringe Central, which artists, art industry, media and international delegates access each summer for events, networking and industry gatherings. This is a significant moment for the Fringe in ensuring a permanent home for the festival. Our grateful thanks to UK Government, the Foyle Foundation and the SP Energy Networks for recognising our vision and supporting us in bringing it to life." Arts Minister Sir Chris Bryant said, "The Edinburgh Fringe is one of the UK's finest cultural festivals, attracting audiences and performance from all over the world every August. But the Fringe is not just for August. This new permanent home means that the Fringe Society can have a secure and meaningful presence in the city all year round, to support artists and provide the local community with access to art spaces." That article was from the Herald Scotland. It was from the news section. It was written by Jodie Harrison, and it was read by me, Corey.
From the Herald Scotland, Wednesday the 5th of February, from the Voices section. Is science showing the flaws in our net zero tree strategy? Article written by Vicky Allen. The question of trees and net zero is often a thorny one. Which trees? Where? Is woodland regeneration better than planting? And, more importantly, is the whole thing part of a carbon credit greenwash that is encouraging us to think we are doing something while we go on burning fossil fuels? Meanwhile chewing up Scotland's land market? A paper published this week is another reminder of the fact that the trees and carbon story is not always a simple net zero boon. Scientists from the James Hutton Institute warned that initiatives that promote self-establishing trees, essentially woodland spread via self-seeding, may not always lead to carbon capture at the decadal timescales relevant to achieving net zero and mitigating climate change. Trees take longer than that to make a difference. Their time frame doesn't bend to the kind of short spans we humans think of as in the long term of politics, international agreements and climate targets. Studies like these serve as a reminder of the slowness of carbon removal by growing forestry. What's burned in a few moments is only absorbed back decades down the line, and also that in focusing chiefly on trees, we have failed to properly emphasise something else: soil carbon, and more crucially, the possibility of its release from peaty Scottish soil. There are many reasons to value trees, but this story we have heard most of trees and carbon offset, and of how planting millions might rescue us, puts trees too much in front and centre of a carbon issue that is much more complex than it is often portrayed. This latest piece of research by the James Hutton Institute, in collaboration with the University of Edinburgh and Forest Research, looked at what happened on heather moorland when trees established from parent trees via seedfall without human intervention. After 25 years, the carbon captured in the small, sparsely growing trees did not exceed the carbon lost from the soil, meaning no carbon was captured following the colonisation of these previously unforested ecosystems by trees. Why choose 25 years? Because that quarter century is significant. It takes us to the 2050 deadline of the Paris Climate Agreement and beyond Scotland's pledge to go net zero by 2045, partly by increasing tree cover. It follows another study by the James Hutton Institute in collaboration with the University of Stirling, which found that planting birch and Scots pine trees in heather moorland ecosystems with carbon-rich soils was linked to soil carbon losses that were similar to the amount of carbon captured in trees. In other words, overall, no net carbon was captured in the first few decades following tree planting. So here we have two studies, one telling us that tree planting, when done in carbon-rich soil, may not result in the benefits sometimes assumed within the timeframe of the 2050 net zero project. The other tells us that even rewilding or regeneration also may not. There is, as Professor Mark Reed, one of the architects of the peatland code carbon credit system, told me, almost as much carbon stored in the UK's peat soils as there is in all our forests and the forests of France and Germany combined. The carbon builds up because the soils are waterlogged, so the biggest threat to this carbon store is the peat drying out. When trees colonise peat soils, their roots dry out the peat and the soil loses carbon, so much so that it cancels out the benefits of carbon sequestered by the trees. It is therefore not permitted, by law, to plant trees in deep peat. The Scottish Government is, of course, trying to tackle some of this and has invested £250 million in peatland restoration over 10 years. 10,000 hectares of peatland were restored between 2023 and 2024. That said, trees can have a net zero role in the long run, particularly if we look beyond 2050. They also perform certain other important roles in our landscapes. As Naomi Housko, postgraduate researcher at the Hutton, who led the latest study, stressed, trees can also be established for other benefits such as increased biodiversity, flood alleviation or recreation. Given that overall we found neither carbon gains nor losses, natural colonisation could still provide an approach for increasing tree cover that provides these ecosystem services. We can continue to celebrate trees and what they do for us, but these studies are a reminder that, for all the big noise there is around tree planting and regeneration, a bigger element of our net zero story is really soil and, in particular, peat. But they also tell us that our priority should be to reduce emissions from the burning of fossil fuels as rapidly as possible, rather than pin our hopes on some possible future trees to draw it back down. And that article was written by Vicky Allen and read by Ian McKenna. From the Herald Scotland, Wednesday, 5th of February, from the business section. Scottish restaurant group defies tough times with Paisano plan, by Ian McConnell. Scotland's largest independent restaurant group has this week shown that, while it might not be easy to make money given the headwinds facing the hospitality sector, it is not impossible. That is not in any way to indicate a lack of sympathy for the many operators struggling amid what are undoubtedly major challenges, but rather to take some heart from one of the success stories. The DRG, the group behind the Café Andaluz and DiMaggio's brands, and now also the owner of Paisano and Sugo outlets in Glasgow following an acquisition last year, highlighted its continuing ambitions for expansion as it unveiled a rebound in profits. In particular, as reported exclusively in the Herald yesterday, it revealed in detail its plans to open more Paisano and Sugo outlets. The DRG, owned by Mario Ghisi and Tony Conetta, achieved record annual turnover of nearly £50 million in its last full financial year. It revealed that it achieved turnover of £49.52 million for the year to April 2024, a rise of £3.68 million in the prior 12 months. The group's operating profit before exceptional items also increased by £1.18 million to around £6.23 million. In the year to April 2023, the DRG's turnover had increased by £1.458 million to £45.838 million, with operating profit before exceptional items falling by £3.7 million to £5.04 million. Mr. Ghisi made no bones this week about the extent of the challenges facing the DRG, as he highlighted the strong performance which has enabled the rebound in profits. He said, "Notwithstanding the ongoing challenges posed by the fallout from the recent UK government budget, especially the hugely significant increase in the cost of labour, plus the legacy of Brexit and its impact on the extremely tight labour market, and increases in the cost of ingredients and other supplies, our team has performed outstandingly well, and we're really excited about the future." The hugely significant increase in the cost of labour was a reference to Chancellor Rachel Reeves' announcement of a hike in employers' national insurance contributions in her budget on October the 30th last year. It was also notable that Mr. Ghisi highlighted the legacy of Brexit and its impact on an extremely tight labour market. This is a continuing challenge faced right across the industry and, indeed, in many other sectors. And, whatever levers might like to portray, Brexit is far from done when it comes to its adverse consequences. The DRG is a business, given that it started in the 1980s, that has had to endure a lot of turbulent economic times. It has constantly evolved and diversified, to the likes of its successful launch decades ago now of its Café Andaluz tapas business, and it continues to do so, not least in recent times through its acquisition of the much-loved Glasgow business comprising 2 Paisano restaurants and 1 Sugo outlet. Restaurateur Paul Stevenson founded the Paisano pizza restaurant in Glasgow's Miller Street in 2015, followed by a sister outlet on Great Western Road in the West End 2 years later, and the Sugo pasta brand in the city's Mitchell Street in 2019. Mr. Stevenson declared, when the sale of his business to the DRG was announced last summer, that the deal would enable the brands to expand whilst retaining the unique ethos and family ownership which has made the restaurant such a roaring success. The DRG this week unveiled its plans for expanding the Paisano and Sugo business with a phased expansion of both brands to add to its existing portfolio of 24 restaurants. This vision is ambitious. The DRG highlighted plans for 3 openings for these brands within 12 months and aspirations for further expansion of Paisano and Sugo north and south of the border in the years ahead. It said it was investing £1 million to launch Paisano in its former DiMaggio's restaurant premises in Shawlands on Glasgow's south side. It declared this would create 40 jobs across kitchen staff and front of house roles. And it highlighted its belief that Paisano and Sugo brands would be fantastic additions to major cities across the UK. The DRG observed the Paisano and Sugo restaurants are among the busiest in the country, with the 250 cover Sugo serving more than 12,000 people per week. Mr. Conetta, director of the DRG, said, "The integration of Paisano and Sugo into our wider operations has been virtually seamless. It's gone exactly as we would have hoped, and the shared ethos of high quality dining and superb authentic ingredients has already proved to be a winning formula. Much of the credit goes to the highly professional teams we inherited as part of the deal. They have integrated really well into the wider group, and the feedback from customers has been overwhelmingly positive. He added, within 12 months, we expect to have doubled the number of Paisano and Sugo restaurants to 6, and we have firm aspirations to further expand north and south of the border in the years ahead. The DRG revealed it is in advanced discussions to open its first restaurant in London, further expanding its Café Andalus concept following recent openings in Newcastle and in Edinburgh's upmarket Stockbridge neighbourhood. Mr. Canetta said, "We have already proved that we can operate very successfully in England and expect to confirm our first Café Andalus this summer in London. We also have no doubt that Paisano and Sugo would be fantastic additions to major cities across the UK and are working hard on the next phase of our expansion plans." Given the DRG's plans to expand the Paisano and Sugo brands north and south of the border, it is no surprise that Mr. Canetto has chosen to underline the restaurant group's credentials in this regard, notably the fact that Café Andalus is already in England. And the DRG looks to be taking its time in ensuring it makes the right move in the London market. With Paisano and Sugo, however, the main challenge in the expansion is probably not one of geography. It would be difficult to overstate just how different these restaurants are as a dining experience in a market that has no shortage of pizza and pasta eateries. What makes them so distinctive is the food, including fresh, simple ingredients, and the laid-back but bustling and energising atmosphere. It is good to hear Mr. Canetta highlight the success of integrating the Paisano and Sugo staff into the group. Ensuring these brands can continue to retain their distinctive character as part of Scotland's largest independent restaurant group will be absolutely crucial as the DRG aims to build this part of its business. In an article written by E. McConnell.
This article, the Herald Diary, is to be found in the paper on Thursday the 6th of February 2025. It is situated in the Voices section and the snippets are collected by Lorne Jackson. The heading of the first, Planet Waves. The Diary is delighted that Donald Trump is back behind the big mahogany desk of the Oval Office because he's always good for copy. Our more cynical readers will claim that he's not quite so good for the planet, but let's ignore such piffling considerations for the moment, because we sense a Donald Diary tale lurking on the horizon. Yep, here it comes now. Malcolm Boyd from Mulgai breathlessly informs us that following Trump's renaming of the Gulf of Mexico, there is a rumour going round the Western Isles that because of the president's island connections, he's going to rename the Atlantic Ocean the West Minch. Fiddling about. The Diary recently discovered a sing-along version of classic horror flick The Wicker Man. Now our readers are choosing songs for the show. Margaret Thompson demands an adaptation of the famous Fiddler on the Roof ditty, now retitled If I Was a Wicker Man. Road to Recovery. Poor Fran Healy of Glasgow rock band Travis twisted his ankle on stage during a Seattle gig, which resulted in him making a humiliating exit from the venue, being wheeled out on a gurney, then into an ambulance, instead of a stretch limo, which we're sure he had booked, as is his right, being a crooner of legendary status. How did Fran choose to recover from his mishap, you may be wondering? Most rockers would enjoy a lengthy soak in a jacuzzi, along with a bottle of Jack Daniels, their favourite loofah, and an assortment of groupies. But our Fran isn't one of those reprobate wretches, so instead he found an equally exhilarating method of recuperation and watched an episode of the Antiques Roadshow. Mugged off. Outraged Richard Davis in Vienna gets in touch to inform us of a heinous criminal act. Someone stole my mug today, he said. Now I have to go to the police station and look at mug shots. Dust up. Valentine's Day approaches, reminding Gemma Henry of the romantic gift her husband once gave her to celebrate the occasion. A vacuum cleaner. Gemma briefly considered using the contraption on hubby and getting rid of him along with the rest of the dust and debris in the house. Instead, she merely glowered, forcing the poor chap to defend his actions. But it's a red vacuum cleaner, he pointed out, the same colour as a bunch of roses. And finally, maudlin musings. Helpful advice from reader John Garber. If you work hard enough, you can replace depression with exhaustion. Those snippets were compiled by Lorne Jackson. This article, The Herald Diary, is to be found in the paper on Thursday the 6th of February 2025. It is situated in the Voices section and the snippets are collected by Lorne Jackson. The heading of the first, Planet Waves. The diary is delighted that Donald Trump is back behind the big mahogany desk of the Oval Office because he's always good for copy. Our more cynical readers will claim that he's not quite so good for the planet, but let's ignore such piffling considerations for the moment because we sense a Donald Diary tale lurking on the horizon. Yep, here it comes now. Malcolm Boyd from Mulgai breathlessly informs us that following Trump's renaming of the Gulf of Mexico, there is a rumour going round the Western Isles that because of the president's island connections, he's going to rename the Atlantic Ocean the West Minch. Fiddling about. The diary recently discovered a sing-along version of classic horror flick The Wicker Man. Now our readers are choosing songs for the show. Margaret Thompson demands an adaptation of the famous Fiddler on the Roof ditty, now retitled If I Was a Wicker Man. Road to Recovery. Poor Fran Healy of Glasgow rock band Travis twisted his ankle on stage during a Seattle gig, which resulted in him making a humiliating exit from the venue, being wheeled out on a gurney, then into an ambulance, instead of a stretch limo, which we're sure he had booked, as is his right, being a crooner of legendary status. How did Fran choose to recover from his mishap, you may be wondering? Most rockers would enjoy a lengthy soak in a jacuzzi, along with a bottle of Jack Daniels, their favourite loofah, and an assortment of groupies. But our Fran isn't one of those reprobate wretches, so instead he found an equally exhilarating method of recuperation and watched an episode of the Antiques Roadshow. Mugged off. Outraged Richard Davis in Vienna gets in touch to inform us of a heinous criminal act. Someone stole my mug today, he said. Now I have to go to the police station and look at mug shots. Dust up. Valentine's Day approaches, reminding Gemma Henry of the romantic gift her husband once gave her to celebrate the occasion. A vacuum cleaner. Gemma briefly considered using the contraption on hubby and getting rid of him along with the rest of the dust and debris in the house. Instead, she merely glowered, forcing the poor chap to defend his actions. But it's a red vacuum cleaner, he pointed out, the same colour as a bunch of roses. And finally, maudlin musings. Helpful advice from reader John Garber. If you work hard enough, you can replace depression with exhaustion. Those snippets were compiled by Lorne Jackson. This article is from the Herald on Thursday the 6th of February 2025. It is found in the Voices section and the headline is Swinney springs a trap for Sarwar, who walks right into it, and the report is by Rebecca McQuillan. In an age of iconoclasm and insurgency, the ultimate political insider is holding sway in Scotland. John Swinney, as First Minister, has shown a degree of self-assurance he has no right to on paper. It's just over 9 months since the SNP Green power-sharing deal collapsed, exactly 9 months since he became First Minister, heading a minority government in a hostile parliament. 7 months since he led his party to its worst general election losses in the devolution era. In July, he looked like yesterday's man, and his veteran cabinet placeholders for an incoming Labour administration. It doesn't look quite the same now. The dominant story of our times may be the rise of untested populist outsiders who disdain experience or knowledge. But here in Scotland, the SNP's second time round leader is proving it pays to know a thing or two. He has just secured majority support for his budget. External events have naturally helped. Keir Starmer's "things can only get worse" post-election mantra, coupled with the cut to winter fuel payments, caused a drastic poll decline for Scottish Labour that Mr Swinney could not have anticipated. Labour seems to have lost support to both the SNP and Reform UK. The last thing Mr Sarwar wants is an early election, and the smaller parties aren't gunning for one either. So that's made it much easier for Mr Swinney and his Finance Minister, Shona Robison, to get their budget through. But there's canny politics here too. Swinney went into the budget cycle promising to reverse both the winter fuel payment cut and the two-child benefit cap, which UK Labour wants to remove but can't yet afford to. Observers of Scottish politics will note that the SNP could have chosen to mitigate the two-child limit at any point since it was introduced by the Tories. The timing is motivated principally by politics, but you've got to admire the politics. The announcement put Labour in check. How could they possibly vote against these measures, forcing Mr Sarwar to say he would abstain on the budget vote? Meanwhile, a willingness to allow the Lib Dems, Greens and Alba's Ash Regan win some wins has been enough to secure their active support on top of Labour's abstention. So what looked in advance like a precarious budget for a minority government now looks set to go through with majority support. Only the Tories actively oppose it. This is what the founding mothers and fathers of devolution imagined would happen in the horseshoe chamber. Parties with shared values working together across political divides. The constructive appearance may be misleading, but the result is political stability, for now. It's impressive in its way. Mr Swinney has also brought a period of much-needed calm to the SNP. He was elected as a safe pair of hands and has duly steadied the ship. He has control over his cabinet, the fractious right wing of the party, characterised by social conservatism, attachment to North Sea oil, and anxiety about business confidence, has been appeased so far by their leaders pussyfooting through the trans debate, refusal to allow himself to be portrayed as woke, there will be no ban on cats, and equivocation on more licences in the North Sea. But how long can it hold? Can those divisions held in abeyance? How long can a man intimately involved in nearly every consequential decision by the Scottish Government of the last 18 years continue to hold the door shut on the spectres of his past? The independence question is dormant for now, thanks to an uneasy hiatus in hostilities between the gradualists and fundamentalists. There is no momentum behind calls for a second referendum, and with the remnants of Alba fighting amongst themselves, there's little prospect of civil war engulfing the movement for the time being. What's a much bigger immediate problem for Mr Swinney is the SNP's domestic record. His great challenge over the next 15 months is to convince people that public services and the economic growth mission are better in his hands than Labour's, but that's a tough gig. There have been successes for his party, like the Scottish Child Payment and free childcare, but do people feel that public services are improving? Do they feel prosperous and see better times ahead for their children? They do not. There have been some shocking failures. For instance, much heralded promises to employ 800 more GPs have simply not been fulfilled. We have fewer qualified GPs now than in 2017. Standards in maths and science have fallen in schools. Mr Swinney was Education Secretary from 2016 until 2021. Travelling on Scotland's publicly run rail operator is eye-poppingly expensive, but unreliable. There's a chronic housing shortage. The drugs deaths figures are scandalous. It's a downer, the state of things. And under the devolution settlement, that's firmly the Scottish Government's responsibility. John Swinney has made tackling child poverty his personal priority in government and has taken personal charge of running the NHS. That puts him personally in the frame if, or rather when, child poverty and NHS waiting time targets are missed. So, the SNP leader will surely do what SNP leaders do best. He will seek to focus the political debate on matters that can be blamed on Westminster. The Labour government will be misrepresented as a mean-spirited pastiche of their Tory predecessors to fuel the constitutional antagonism that has served the SNP so well. We could perhaps see the shape of things in the Commons yesterday, when SNP MP Dave Duggan focused on winter fuel payments, national insurance costs, and trying to pin the plight of Grangemouth workers on a Labour government that came to power 8 months after the refinery's closure was announced. It's not a game for faint hearts, Scottish politics. John Swinney's reassuring, respectful manner masks deadly political instincts. Anna Sarwar needs Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer, and the gods above to deliver him the feel-good factor by next May, or he will find himself cast as the clever SNP leader's stooge, taking the flak for failures that are far more of the SNP's making than Labour's. That report was by Rebecca McQuillan. This article is from the Herald on Thursday the 6th of February 2025. It is found in the Voices section and the headline is "The Special Relationship Britain Really Needs is with the EU" and the report is by Brian Wilson. Winston Churchill coined the term special relationship to encapsulate ties that bind the UK to the United States. In 1944, after American intervention helped turn the tide of war in Europe, Churchill declared it was his deepest conviction that unless Britain and the United States are joined in a special relationship, another destructive war will come to pass. Maybe that deeply rooted alliance would have continued anyway, but the phrase stuck and became the cornerstone of British foreign policy and military preparedness ever since. A yardstick against which policies and pronouncements are measured, perhaps to an unhealthy degree, which sometimes demanded silence or complicity when a critical friend was required. The Suez Crisis in 1956 clarified where power lay. Britain neglected to consult the Americans before setting off to invade the Suez Canal, which President Nasser of Egypt had nationalised. President Eisenhower was furious and told the Prime Minister Anthony Eden to behave himself. British forces were promptly withdrawn, and the relationship since has been between leader and follower. Then it took a clever statesman like Harold Wilson to keep us out of the Vietnam imbroglio while not breaking the special relationship. But even that demanded silence when voices around the world and on the streets were being raised. The balancing act between diplomacy and political principle was never more delicate. By and large, the ambiguity could be defended on grounds of common cause. In extremis, just as in 1944, the two states, along with like-minded allies, would form the last line of defence for democracy, no matter what they did elsewhere in the world. By extension, there was an assumption, more British than American, that the relationship extended into other fields, notably trade. From Whitehall's perspective, a key point about the special relationship was that it transcended party politics. Democrat or Republican, Labour or Tory, it must be maintained at all costs. As I write, there will be teams of anxious mandarins struggling to ensure this golden rule is observed and business as usual maintained, no matter what moral or political impediments require to be overlooked. Considering what is happening in Washington, however, the question really does arise of whether we want to be associated with any of this. Domestic policy, it will be argued, is none of our diplomatic business, but the same could have been said, and was by some, about South Africa under apartheid. If America under Donald Trump becomes a cesspit of prejudice which turns its back on the poor of the world, will we really be able to look the other way? I do not underestimate the difficulties involved in kicking the special relationship habit. Equally, there has been no point in post-war history at which a British Prime Minister has had more reason to doubt the wisdom of investing faith in an America president whose behaviour falls far outside the bounds of reason. How much of what he stands for in foreign policy should we be tied to, leading potentially to military adventurism? Keir Starmer seems to have bought himself time by earning the good opinions of President Trump through sitting beside him at dinner. The UK may escape punitive tariffs as a result. Good news, but it's a shaky peg on which to hang any relationship, far less a special one, and the narrative could change at the stroke of a pen. Neither does Starmer have to react to Trump's wild foreign policy pronouncements while he is talking rather than acting, but that script can change at short notice. In the Commons yesterday, Starmer could avoid criticising Trump's ravings about clearing Gaza of people in order to turn it into a property opportunity. If and when that starts to happen, or if the killing resumes with American authority, will it be so easy? The least that can be said is that we need to hedge bets in trade and other aspects of the relationship. Keir Starmer is right to say the optimum position is to have good relationships with both the US and the EU. But if the transatlantic connections become frayed or uncertain for whatever reasons, it will be prudent to have somewhere else to go. Accordingly, the logic of this unique set of circumstances seems to me to do exactly what Starmer is attempting, to gradually reset relationships with the European Union while not going out of his way to upset Trump. That moment will come soon enough if current trajectories are maintained and the wild men in the White House gain control. I find the calls for Starmer to go further and faster tiresome. Those who shout loudest about the damage done by Brexit also seem to be the ones who think it easiest to reverse. The barriers which have been created since 2016 cannot be wished away, whereas slow but steady movement towards common sense can gradually reverse the process. Fellow EU leaders have no difficulty understanding Starmer's caution, since most of them are fighting populist right-wing forces within their own countries, while others, like Italy and Hungary, are already products of that movement. If the Brexit debate was reopened in any part of the UK at this juncture, the only winners would be those who thrive on that single issue. As it is, the Labour government has committed to being ruthlessly pragmatic in securing a deal within 3 months, which will cover the low-hanging fruit of EU cooperation. The subjects on the table include trade, defence, energy security, tackling crime and illegal migration. That seems not a bad list to be going on with. Even more important is the change of climate around these discussions. After years of dealing with Tory oddballs and zealots, European governments find themselves talking to politicians who are basically pro-European but have to recognise the political hazards of going too far, too fast. In itself, that is the difference between night and day. It lays the ground for positive change over the next few years and should help us to see out the Trump chaos. That report was by Brian Wilson.
The Herald, Saturday the 8th of February 2024, from the news section. What is the Sauchiehall Street Culture and Heritage District? For over a century, it has stood as one of Glasgow and Scotland's most famous thoroughfares, home to famous department stores, nightclubs and bars, and at the heart of city life. Sauchiehall Street and its surrounds are filled with history and memories for every Glaswegian, but in recent years have become a barometer of the city's apparent decline. As the streets and pavements have been ripped up and replaced with the aim of creating a new pedestrian promenade and cycle lanes, boards have gone up and shops emptied, contributing to a pervasive and corrosive sense of decline. As the works wore on without end in sight, emphasising the rubble and scaffolds of the burnt-out Glasgow School of Art and old ABC venue, even the most optimistic of Glaswegians began to lose hope. In recent weeks, we have seen the first green shoots of recovery as works have been completed. The fences have come down and a new sign appeared among the adverts and posters. The Sauchiehall Street Culture and Heritage District. What exactly is it? And, taking into account the empty shop fronts and fire-damaged buildings and rubble, where exactly is the culture and heritage? For Billy Garrett, the Director of Culture, Tourism and Events at Glasgow Life, it signals a new chapter in the Sauchiehall story. You write off anything in this city at your peril, he said. People have written off this city before. People have written off parts of this city if you look at the Gorbals or what's happening in Govan, with the developments over there at the bridge over at Finnieston. What this city has demonstrated time and time again is that it can reinvent itself and neighbourhoods, but it takes time. You've got to start somewhere. Although the area is called the Sauchiehall Street Culture and Heritage District, it also brings in some of the streets around it. Bath Street, Renfrew Street, Garnet Hill and the surrounding side streets, bookended by the Mitchell Library at one end and the Royal Concert Hall at the other. The aim of the project is to revitalise the area by celebrating the history as a place of vibrancy and culture, and there's 3 strands to it: uncovering, animating and renewing Sauchiehall Street. A history project in partnership with the University of Glasgow has created an interactive map which can be accessed online, charting the history of the street from 1885 right through to the present day. It is so good, Mr. Carrot reckons. Once you go into that, you'll be in for hours. It is amazing. Artists Craig McCorkadale, Molly Jack, Alice Brown and Ellie Mills are working with community groups and residents to explore the stories and memories people have and reflect them in associated works. There's a project space on Sauchiehall Street where people can drop in and give their thoughts, and there's a 10-year plan being put in place to ensure it can have a viable future, a stable future, and hopefully a prosperous future. The area has been home to some well-known landmarks throughout history, from the Mackintosh Building, where the Glasgow School of Art was based, to the Royal Conservatoire, the Pavilion, and Kynes Theatre, and the Willow Tea Rooms. Using this history as a foundation, the plan is to increase the footfall and bring back the buzz and excitement for which the area was once known. A street-long strip, the Willow, was due to be held on January 25th to mark the opening of the district, until Storm Eowyn faced forced postponement. It has now been rescheduled for Saturday, February the 15th. Cynics will perhaps understandably suspect that such events are merely designed as a distraction from the real issues impacting on the area. But Mr. Garrett continued, "We're not suggesting a Strip the Willow or a couple of music sessions will transform the fortunes of Sauchiehall Street, but it begins to create a different narrative and tells a different story of, you know what, don't write off Sauchiehall Street. The challenges Sauchiehall Street faces are connected into a wide set of challenges in most cities and on high streets, where there is a bit of a challenge. We're clear that some of the challenges on Sauchiehall Street are more local in nature. On Sauchiehall Street there is the fires which have ravaged the School of Art and had impact on the street in terms of the ABC and its demolition. There's previous fires to the east in terms of Victoria's, it suffered there. There's the work which has recently been happening in terms of the Avenues project. That's well and truly publicised and the impact that it has had. The Avenues project is beginning to be complete. Some of the fences are coming down, and although there's still work to be done, some of it is coming down. There's lighting and street furniture going in. There's a lot of work being done to make sure the trees really grow, unlike last time. It's about £30 million along the street, so there's a real vote of confidence in the street. People who have never been to Glasgow have heard of Sauchiehall Street, and it goes all the way back to the 19th century with Hengler's Circus and the Empire Theatre, where English comics come to die. Contrary to that, Laurel and Hardy had a show here in 1952 that was so successful the Glasgow crowd carried them on their shoulders up Sauchiehall Street, so it's got that heritage and those memories. Everyone understands why people would be frustrated about what's happening in and around the city centre. The works have taken longer than anyone would have liked, but what people maybe need to understand is those works are a statement of commitment to the street, a real vote of confidence to a future of the street. No one is giving up on Sauchiehall Street. All of the naysayers, concerns and complaints are taken on board. People really care. The people who work on this project care about Sauchiehall Street, the long-term success of the city centre. No one is sitting on their hands and there is no complacency. We are genuinely interested in hearing from Glaswegians about their city, whether it is positive or negative, but we have confidence in the street. We do think the combination of all the activity, engagement and intense focus and all of the effort will in the long run reap dividends, and it would be great if people can get on board and engage with us. Pop in and have a chat and tell us your memories of Sauchiehall Street. All Glaswegians have a stake in Sauchiehall Street. I'd never criticise anyone who has a view on the street, because they are all valid and legitimate, but I want to reassure people there is a real, genuine commitment and a degree of excitement about what might be possible up at Sauchiehall Street. The Herald, Saturday the 8th of February 2024, from the sports section. When did Schlupp initially hear about Celtic interest? By Josh McCaverty. Geoffrey Schlupp first heard that Celtic wanted to bring him north of the border at 2 p.m. on transfer deadline day. The versatile utility man joined the Parkhead side on Monday evening, with his capture being announced across club channels at 11 p.m. Celtic were initially linked with Schlupp back in the summer, although a move never came to fruition. With Alex Val's somewhat unexpected departure last month, however, cover at left-back was needed, and the Scottish Premiership champions sought the services of the 32-year-old. Schlupp recently revealed how the move came to fruition, explaining how it was somewhat of a late surprise. I found out about 2 o'clock on deadline day, he said. It came about that there was a chance to come here on loan until the end of the season, and I was up for it. I spoke to the gaffer again about an hour after that, and they said the deal was on if I fancied it. It was an easy decision for me, and I headed straight to London to do the medical, and the next morning I headed straight up to Glasgow. It was a busy couple of days. Schlupp debuted for his new club in a 6-0 trouncing of Dundee on Wednesday evening. Celtic moved 13 points clear of city rivals Rangers at the top of the Scottish Premiership with the emphatic victory. Now, though, while next Wednesday's clash with Bayern Munich lurks in the distance, full focus is on the Scottish Cup and today's clash with Race Rovers. The Herald, Saturday the 8th of February 2024, from the sports section. Why Rangers had to wait until the summer for Lyle Cameron. Philippe Clement has revealed the reason Rangers didn't bring Lyle Cameron to the club in January was purely financial. The talented midfielder has signed a pre-contract with the Ibrox club. He will join from Scottish Premiership side Dundee in the summer. Clement admitted that Rangers wanted more signings in the winter window, with Rafa Fernandes the only arrival on loan from Lille. However, it was not possible to draft Cameron, 22, in before the summer. "I'm very happy that he comes," the 50-year-old said. "It's next season. It's part of our plans that we have with the club to develop young Scottish players, or to get young Scottish players with potential to give them chances also. Lyle did already a lot of good things in Dundee. I think he scored 18 or 19 goals already in 83 games for Dundee. So that's almost 1 out of 4, so those are really good stats. He has the right mentality. He really wants to come to the club. We had several talks about how I see him playing and what he could do for the team, so we're happy that he can come next season. You don't need to know everything. We had enough talks with him that he understands what Rangers is, and of course Scottish players know it more. But you need to live the building, you need to live the club, also to know things. It's different. Like for Conor Barron, it was also different to come here and to play. But he knew also really well what this club is about. We're looking for that kind of character also. Not only good players, but also players who can cope with what it is like to be a Rangers player and have the right mentality. And Lyle showed that in the talks. Asked directly why the club didn't try to push through the deal before the end of the recent transfer window, the Belgian replied, "At the end, that's a financial decision, of course."
The Herald on the 7th February and the Arts and Ents section. Still feral after all these years, AC/DC finally returned to Scotland by Russell Ledbetter. Ali McCoy's face, it's fair to say, was a picture when he heard the ominous sound of a tolling bell being relayed over the pre-match PA system at Munich's Allianz Stadium last April. Ali was part of a commentating team present for Bayern Munich's Arsenal Champions League match, and he was taken aback when he heard the distinctive sound of the bell. "That can't be AC/DC, he told his colleagues. Pause. "If there's a guitar comes in here in a minute, it's unbelievable." Seconds later, a guitar riff obligingly started up. It's Hell's Bells, AC/DC. Oh man, can he beat a bit of AC/DC, man? Ali began nodding his head in time to the beat. Briefly, his hands mimicked those of the guitarist. Even more briefly, he uses his TNT sports mic as a drumstick. "They're brilliant," he enthuses. "I saw them Glasgow Apollo 1980. That was the opening tune." The video was reposted on Facebook earlier this week by Scottish Rugby after it was announced that AC/DC will bring their Power Up tour to the Scottish Gas Murrayfield Stadium on August 21. We know one man that will be excited by this morning's announcement. Read the post. "We'll be seeing you in August, Ali." Tickets went on sale at 10 a.m. today, sparking an online frenzy amongst fans. Some 200 million plus record sales into their career, AC/DC remain one of the most commanding and most popular acts in rock music. Reviewing the band's opening night show at the Wembley Arena last July, Mojo magazine had this to say: "AC/DC have always operated on the grandest scale imaginable. After all, this is a group who once had their own stage erected solely for their headline set at Download Festival in 2010, while everyone else, Rage Against the Machine and Aerosmith included, shared a different one. Their predilection for all things colossal clearly endures as they play this, the first of two shows at Wembley Stadium on a world tour partly conceived to honour their 50th anniversary. In the battle between this being the Power Up Tour, as officially billed, and a 50th anniversary celebration, reviewer George Garner added, there is a clear winner. What transpires is a set that largely leans on hits, Shoot to Thrill, You Shook Me All Night Long, Dirty Deeds Done Cheap, and many more besides, with each received rapturously by an audience that seemingly have the tracks backed into their DNA. But if AC/DC have largely made it easy for themselves in this regard, what mass congregation of people doesn't want to sing Highway to Hell? The performance is certainly not one of a band on cruise control. It's hard not to be swept up in the uncomplicated purity of their vision. Rock songs about rock played in a way that irrefutably rocks. That their stage props remain so exquisitely literal is the icing on the cake. The ominous intro of Hell's Bells, replete with a giant bell dangling from the rafters, never fails to disappoint. For his part, The Guardian's critic, Michael Hann, noted, the emotional power comes from the suspicion that this world tour will surely be the band's last, and from the palpable joy their thrilling, reductive, primal music has brought over so many years. It's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll. They sang a very long time ago. they reach the top, and when they leave us, it will be from the top. As a measure of how far the band had progressed since their earliest days, consider this Melody Maker review of a London marquee gig of theirs back in August 1976. Those puzzled by the status quo phenomenon should beware. AC/DC, from the same rock family, could wreak similar havoc, but they will only realise their full potential if, amid all the raucousness that inevitably surrounds power chord bands, they get better organise their assaults. But whatever they do lack in presentation at the moment, the band is certainly making great strides towards becoming a major attraction. Although I'm sure that the gig I saw at the Marquee, where sweat was shed by the bucketful, was an off night for the band. Sound troubles twice brought the gig to a halt. They did enough to show that they're a good boogie band, but with apparently no pretensions about being anything else. That the announcement of August's Murrayfield show comes not long after the 45th anniversary of their final show with singer Bon Scott is a poignant reminder of how time has caught up with AC/DC. Scott, who was born in Forfar, raised in Kirriemoor and grew up in Melbourne, Australia, made his AC/DC debut in October 1974, 10 months after the band had played its very first show at a Sydney nightclub on New Year's Eve 1973. During Bond's time with the band, they made 6 hard rock studio albums: TNT, High Voltage, Dirty Deeds Done Cheap, Let There Be Rock, Powerage, and what Steve Tyler describes as he introduced the band into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2003, the 6 million seller Sensory Assault Highway to Hell. There was also an unforgettable live album, If You Want Blood, You've Got It, which was recorded at the Glasgow Apollo in April 1978. There's a video online of the band's Glasgow-born lead guitarist, Angus Young, rocking out while wearing a Scotland strip on the Apollo's balcony. In the words of the Daily Telegraph, assessing in 2023 the 50 greatest live albums of all time, AC/DC were at the time the rawest and most feral bar band in the world. The charismatic Bond died, however, in February 1980, a few weeks after they had rounded off their Highway to Hell tour with a show in Southampton. 9 months after his passing, AC/DC had a new lead singer in the shape of Brian Johnson, who had previously sung with the group Geordie. The first album with him was Back in Black, their tribute to Bon, and which has since staked his claim to be one of the greatest hard rock albums of all time, selling an estimated 50 million copies. Its opening track, Hell's Bells. As the ultimate classic rock site has put it, AC/DC's unlikely bounce back from the brink of Bon Scott's less disaster. Sales for Back in Black are so colossal, its songs so inescapable on the web, radio, TV, and its rarefied genius so unchallenged that the album has almost transcended music to become a veritable cultural monolith. It's fair to say that songs like Shoot to Thrill, You Shoot Me All Night Long, and Back in Black are always playing somewhere around the planet, and that's really as it should be. AC/DC's most recent album, 2020's Power Up, has continued the band's phenomenal success story, going straight to the top of the US Billboard 200, making many Best of the Year lists and earning Grammy nominations. Back in 2016, Johnson, plagued by severe issues with his hearing, was replaced by the Guns N' Roses vocalist Axl Rose for a string of live dates. He has been able to return to live duties thanks to new technology. In Mojo's description, a medical device that essentially uses his skull's bone structure as an audio receiver, restoring his hearing and voice. And he was able to sing on Power Up. Steve Tyler, for one, admires Johnson for what he has described as his nerves of steel and in a velvet glove sledgehammer to the back of the head vocals. AC/DC founding member Malcolm Young, brother of Angus, died aged 64 in 2017 after suffering from dementia, and the long-serving rhythm section of bass guitarist Cliff Williams and drummer Phil Rudd has retired. As the Herald noted in its 5-star review of an AC/DC gig at Hampden in the summer of 2015, They may be a little short of the original members' front, but Angus Young still duck walks in his school uniform, here in a rather fetching scarlet, and the band still churn out the baddest rock boogie on the planet. The current lineup sees Angus, now 69, on lead guitar, and Johnson playing alongside rhythm guitarist Stevie Young, drummer Matt Lugg, and bass player Chris Cheney. Live, they are still a captivating spectacle, as thousands of Scottish fans, and perhaps Ali McCoist, will discover from themselves on August 21. And that was by Russell Ledbetter.
From the Herald, Sunday, 9th of February 2025. Sports section. Tavernier believes Rangers fans have every right to be angry. By Robbie Hanratty, sports writer. Furious James Tavernier admits that Rangers deserve all the criticism that's coming their way after they were dumped out of the Scottish Cup by second-tier opposition. Tavernier's penalty miss deep into the second half stoppage time meant that Queen's Park had done enough to seal a historic fifth-round triumph over the Light Blues at Ibrox. Seb Drode's impressive strike in the 69th minute gave the visitors a surprising advantage, even though Rangers had largely dominated possession and repeatedly threatened the Spiders' 18-yard box. The Scottish Premiership giants tirelessly sought an equaliser and appeared to be on the brink of success in the 97th minute with a penalty. However, Tavernier had his attempt spectacularly denied by Callum Ferry, leading to jubilant celebrations from those in Queen's Park colours, whilst angry home supporters made their feelings known. It's unacceptable, Tavernier confessed. We can't be losing at home. We can't be having over 30 shots a goal. I believe it was 12 shots on target. I've got to do better with the penalty. But we have to take accountability, everybody. It's just unacceptable. It's as simple as that. Being a Rangers player comes with expectations, and you have to deliver. If you don't, then, rightly so, you will be hit with the brunt of the fans. That's exactly what we deserve today. I wasn't really touch on tempo, as I think we created chances, but just not good enough. You can't be shooting that many times at goal and putting the ball over the bar too many times. We gave up an easy goal, and we can't be doing that. Asked if he as captain acknowledged the rage from the Rangers fan base following the result, Tavernier replied, I think you have to. You can't be losing at home to a championship team. It's as simple as that. They've got every right to be mad at us. That article was by Robbie Hanratty. From the Herald, Sunday, 9th of February 2025. Sports section. Scotland 18, Ireland 32. Clinical visitors triumph with a bonus point. By Anthony Brown, Press Association. Ireland bolstered their hopes of a third successive Guinness Six Nations title as they made it 11 wins in a row over Scotland with a ruthless bonus point, 32-18 triumph at Murrayfield. The Scots endured a disastrous first half in which they allowed the dominant Irish to build a 17-0 lead through tries from Calvin Nash and captain Caelan Doris, while also losing three of the most influential backs to Han van der Merwe in a yellow card and both talismanic co-captain Finn Russell and wing Darcy Graham to head injuries. Scotland rallied just before and after half-time, with a Van der Merwe try and two Blair Kinghorn penalties bringing the hosts back to within 6 points at 17-11. But Ireland soon reasserted their authority, with further scores from James Lowe and substitute Jack Conan, securing the bonus point and taking the game beyond the Scots, who added a late consolation through Ben White. They were emotional scenes in the moments leading up the kick-off, as former Team GB Olympic champion cyclist Sir Chris Hoy, who has terminal cancer, was given a rapturous reception from the Murrayfield crowd when he walked out onto the pitch to deliver the match ball wearing a Scotland shirt. Once proceedings were underway, Ireland wasted little time in seizing control. After some sustained early pressure, Simon Easterly's side got themselves ahead in the 8th minute when Nash, a late addition to the starting 15 in place of the injured Mac Hansen, was presented with an easy score in the right after a lovely pass from Leinster fly half Sam Pendergast found the winger in oceans of space. Pendergast, making his first appearance in an away test for Ireland, was on point with the conversion. Scotland's task got even bigger in the 14th minute when the record try scorer Van der Merwe was yellow carded for foul play after shoving Nash as he chased the bouncing ball in front of the try line. The only consolation for the Scots was that referee James Dolman did not award a penalty try, as he felt the Irish wing would not have caught the ball in time to ground it. With Van der Merwe still in the sin bin, Scotland suffered even more significant backline disruption. In the 21st minute, when talisman Russell and jet-heeled wing Graham crashed into each other while trying to defend another dangerous Irish surge down the left. Russell was able to walk off for his HIA, while Graham, who came off worst, left the field lying prone on the buggy, with neither of the key duo able to play any further part. Both of Scotland's replacement backs, Stafford McDowell and Jamie Dubby, were used up and almost 3/4 of the match to play. A Prendergast penalty extended Ireland's lead to 10, just before Van der Merwe returned to the field. Scotland had failed to enter the Irish 22 in the opening half hour, and Ireland tightened their grip on the match in the 32nd minute when Captain Doris pushed his way over on the left after being fed by Jemison Gibson Park following a purposeful carry from Pendergast. Scotland finally came to life in the closing 5 minutes of the half and managed to get themselves off the mark in the last action before the interval as Van der Merwe produced an outstanding finish on the left after McDowell offload. Kinghorn, taking on kicking duties in the absence of Russell, was off target with the conversion, but the Irish would have been a touch disappointed to go in just 12 points ahead of the break, given their dominance. Kinghorn reduced the deficit further with a 43-minute penalty, and with the Scots' tails up, Ireland had a let-off when centre Robbie Henshaw avoided a yellow card after he was contentiously deemed not to have committed a deliberate knock-on while thwarting a dangerous attack. Another Kinghorn penalty brought Scotland remarkably within 6 points of their visitors in the 49th minute. But just as the hosts were sensing a chance to get back on terms, Ireland flexed their muscles again, with low scoring on the left and Prendergast adding the extras. Conan then nosed his way over on the right after being set up by Henshaw just before the hour. Pendergast missed the conversion, but then added a further 3 points with the long-distance penalty in the 70th minute, as the Irish killed any lingering hopes of a Scottish fightback. Gregor Townsend's men did close the gap again when White scored a late try, converted by Kinghorn, but Ireland had already done more than enough to ensure they head to Wales next time, as the only side still in with a chance of a Grand Slam after the opening 2 matches. The article was by Anthony Brown. From the Herald, Sunday, 9th of February 2025, Sports section. Sir Chris Hoy's symbolic role before Scotland versus Ireland in the Six Nations. By Robbie Hanratty, sports writer. In the poignant moment before Scotland's Six Nations match against Ireland, Sir Chris Hoy had the honour of delivering the match ball as the teams prepared to kick off. The 48-year-old, 6-time Olympic gold medalist wore a Scotland rugby jersey with Hoy on the back and appeared emotional, as did many around the stadium. His presence added a symbolic touch to the occasion, further stirring the crowd's excitement for the game ahead. A sellout Merrifield erupted in applause. Hoy's involvement in the pre-match ceremony resonated deeply, capturing the pride and passion of Scottish sport. The match ball was transferred from Dublin to Edinburgh by Rob Wainwright, former Scotland captain and close teammate of the late Doddy Weir, who is a champion of Doddy Aid. Wainwright cycled over 800 miles across 5 days, and it's the 6th consecutive year that the 59-year-old who completed an endurance challenge to raise money for charity. In October 2024, Hoy revealed he has terminal prostate cancer and was given 2 to 4 years to live, so every single public appearance is cherished. That article was by Robbie Hanratty.
The Herald on the 11th of February and the news section. Letters. The constant carping about the Glen Sannox is ridiculous. Regarding Claire Johnson's letter, February 5, the constant carping about the new Glen Sannox is quite ludicrous. It is not the ferry that is the problem, but the row berth. The demand for car ferries in the 1950s brought the arrival of side-loading car ferries using the existing pier infrastructure. At peak times, they were far too slow loading and unloading and ran hours late, and it was clear that the system was not working. The decision was to turn to roll-on, roll-off. The Stena Baltica was purchased second-hand and the present berth created at Ardrossan. It was a terrible solution for a terrible boat. It was unstable and lurched alarmingly to the side, so badly on one occasion that a sheep float toppled, killing sheep and crushing cars. This boat, renamed Caledonia, was relocated to the Oban Mull run, her capacity too small to cope on the Arran run. The next boat was even worse. The converted side-loader Clansman took up the run. Cramped, uncomfortable, slab-sided, she was a disaster. The passenger capacity in winter was reduced to under 200. After all the vehicles were loaded and the passengers counted, the balance was allowed to board. This culminated in an astonishing event one December when islands were denied boarding. One frantic islander climbed up the main hawser in an attempt to board. On board, a big Highland seaman reached over the rail, grabbed him by the scruff, and with one deft move boarded him and saved his life. This boat in the later Caledonian Isles had great difficulty in turning into the berth, with the prevailing wind hard against her side. The usual course of action was to reroute to Gourock. Cynics amongst us often thought the captain stayed in Gourock as winter crossings often ended there. The hastily constructed row-row berth was a disaster. It constricted the development of decent boats for the crossing. The construction of the berth was more than 50 years ago, long before the Scottish Government. It was the usual attitude, the cheap option will do Scotland and give them useless boats. We deserve a proper harbour fit to take modern boats and not a lash-up at the smallest possible cost. We have a great new boat, but successive governments of all hues have failed to provide the necessary infrastructure. All new ships have teething troubles, so don't blame the boat. As a very frequent traveller to Arran, the journey matters both ways and not just to the island. The present difficulties pale in the light of past operations, and a proper all-weather berth should be constructed. That was by Alistair MacFarlane in Troon. Hoard must be returned. It is good news that researchers at the National New Museum Scotland, MNS, have discovered who owns the Galloway hoard. Hoard belonged to the community, the Herald, February 8. The inscription they have translated, this is in the community's wealth, property, could not be clearer. This should mean that NMS will now hand the hoard back to the current Galloway community to be displayed there. Given the number of pieces in the hoard, I am sure that the Galloway community will lend a small selection to NMS for display in Edinburgh. But given NMS's past and continuing hoarding of treasures taken from across Scotland, such as the St Ninian's Isle treasure taken from Shetland, I fear that NMS will not release its grip on the Galloway hoard unless forced to do so. The only hope is that Scottish Minister responsible for Heritage, Angus Robertson, will step in and order the hoard's return to the community which is now known to own it. This would be in breach of this government's Centralise Everything Code. But the government's recent backing down over centralising social care has set a precedent he should now follow. That was by Alistair Eaton in Edinburgh. Radio Scotland, we deserve better. It was reported last week that BBC Radio Scotland continues to suffer a big slump in listeners. This is not surprising. There are some excellent and very professional presenters. Stephen Jardine, Kay Adams, Martin Giesler, Fiona Stalker and some breakfast slot presenters. But others, presenters who are unable to interview properly, whose diction is appalling, whose grammar is absolutely wrong. There are afternoon presenters whom I just refuse to listen to. Cringeworthy garbage. Then Saturday, petty and ill-informed comment on football. Well, if it's petty and ill-informed, get it off the air. It's not surprising that the unprofessional central belt emphasis on Radio Scotland is resulting in a slumping listeners. This is a national broadcaster and we deserve very much better. And that was Douglas Cow in Newmacher. Why the manager was cross, like Gordon Fisher, letters February 10. I fondly remember Pearl and Dean local cinema ads, especially the ones for curry houses which were always 100 yards from this cinema, and the occasionally dodgy pronunciation of local areas voiced by the 100 from a studio in Soho. On one occasion, I even remember a typo in the script where Partick Cross Cabs in Glasgow became Patrick Cross Cabs. On leaving the cinema, the salon in Hillhead, I mentioned this to Lennox McNeil, the manager, who expressed his surprise in quite a robust manner and presumably got on the phone to Pearl and Dean to have it re-recorded. That was Stuart Neville in Clydebank. Swapping clubs. We come along on Saturday morning, greeting everybody with a smile. We come along on Saturday morning knowing it's well worthwhile as members of the Odeon Club. We all intend to be good citizens when we grow up and citizens of the free. We come along on Saturday morning, greeting everybody with a smile, 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 greeting everybody with a smile. So sang we before the films so well described by Isabel McEwen, letters February 8. And then aged 13, I took up golf. And that's from David Miller in Milgai. Doubling up, George Orwell would be delighted to know that his spirit lives on in East Renfrewshire Council. Residents have just been notified that there will be no increase in the annual cost for garden waste service, but the uplift will be changed from weekly to fortnightly. And that was by Jim McSheffrey in Netherley. That was the letters section. The Herald on the 11th of February and the news section. NHS Trans Tribunal is about much more than a nurse's fight for her job by Kevin McKenna. What better way to sidetrack the Liberal left from their main goal of relieving poverty and opposing capitalism than by promoting an imaginary dogma of oppression? There's a reason why corporate power and public sector influence has swung behind the campaign for trans rights. If you convince sincere and well-motivated people that this is the moral crusade that defines the age, then you can be left relatively undisturbed to amass your profits. And what better way of doing this than by conjuring up an ethereal and contrived suite of slogans and declarations? Trans rights are human rights. Love is love. Of course, trans rights are human rights, but when they are pursued at the expense of women's rights, then they can become diktats to be wielded against working class women who have neither the power nor the material resources to resist, or to bludgeon the reputation of other women who refuse to accept the fiction that there are more than two sexes and that a woman can have a penis. Love is love, we're told. Well, football is football and cars are cars. Love is more than a catchphrase that handily fits into a single line on a banner. Love can mobilise nations and end wars. It forms families and becomes the last refuge when the state and law of the land turn against you. Love produces hope for the sick and the infirm and the oppressed. Love is delight and heartache. It's worth fighting for and dying for. But love can't exist without truth. Love and truth, and what it means to be a woman, are currently being examined in an employment tribunal where Sandy Peggy, an A&E nurse with a 30-year record of unblemished service, is fighting NHS Fife for her career. Ms. Peggy was disciplined and suspended by her bosses for having challenged a biological male doctor, who is now a trans woman, who had sought to use the female nurse's changing room. The doctor, Beth Upton, told the tribunal last week of feeling distressed and afraid when Miss Peggy said on Christmas Eve 2023 that a man couldn't be in the changing room. Miss Peggy argued that being made to share such an intimate space with Dr. Upton amounted to sexual harassment. harassment related to a protected belief, indirect discrimination and victimisation. She was suspended by the Health Board for the following month for bullying and harassment, pending an investigation after Dr. Upton reported her. In some reporting of the tribunal proceedings, it was claimed that Ms. Peggy had admitted harassment. Yet, as anyone who's been following live streaming of the hearing would have known, she was simply sticking to a position which is protected under UK law, that trans women are men and that she is fully entitled under the law to have access to a secure single-sex space. The case is of profound importance to the rights of women in the workplace. If Ms. Peggy prevails, then it will require other employers, especially in the public sector, to provide protected single-sex spaces for biological women in their place of work. In the case of Sandy, Peggy against NHS 5 is one of those cut-through moments when the general public have been afforded a glimpse behind the veil that's been carefully drawn over the trans debate by Scotland's political class. Millions of pounds have been spent by government departments, health and education boards and lobbyists, along with some carefully chosen media glove puppets to ensure that men self-identifying as women is a done deal before the public wakes up to what's really happening. As all of this was proceeding with flags and parades and bunting, almost imperceptibly by the concept of what it meant to be a woman was being dismantled, starting with words but eventually proceeding to material reality. It seemed that women's sexual and reproductive characteristics were being neutralised to the extent in that some NHS guidelines, the word woman was erased completely. It began to be endorsed quietly at first by politicians either too thick to understand what was happening, too cowardly to resist what they knew to be wrong, or simply channeling their clandestine misogyny. For some, this was an opportunity to shake their long-held jealousy of women or resentment of their professional success. In Scotland's public sector, it first became evident when decent men and women with flawless service records were being told to use pronouns. In the political arena, especially in the SNP, smart women such as Joanna Cherry, Jo McAlpine, Ash Regan and Kate Forbes were targeted and one by one taken out at the behest of the party leadership. Other gaps in the curtain soon followed. First up was the Isle of Bryson case and the grim truth long withheld that some violent males, lately identifying as women, were serving their time in the women's prison estate. Then, Edinburgh Rape Crisis Centre was revealed to have targeted its own staff who had raised concerns that profoundly vulnerable female victims of male sexual violence were sometimes being counselled by biological males. The Cass Review, the most exhaustive and authoritative study of gender identity services for children and young people ever commissioned, highlighted the risk of prescribing puberty blockers and hormone treatment to those with other underlying health issues. The public is now much more aware of what's at stake here, and Scotland's political elites are raging about that, trying to tell the punters that it's entirely normal to expect women to undress in front of male colleagues would be a very difficult sell. The great victory of capitalism is that almost the entire trade union movement, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats and the Greens have embraced this dogma to the extent that it risks marginalising millions of working class women who had chiefly relied on these organisations to gain equality in the workplace and freedom from harassment. It has used up valuable time and resources that should have been deployed in the class struggle for a fairer distribution of the nation's resources. And that was by Kevin McKenna.
That concludes this week's edition of the Herald Scotland podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels at Tune Review and to tell your friends about our service.